The wedding dress felt like a burial gown, and Amara stood in front of the mirror trying not to shake. Somewhere beyond the heavy oak doors, over 200 guests waited to watch her marry a man she had spoken to exactly 4 times in her life. Her mother's hands trembled as they fixed the veil, whispering that everything would be fine, that the Kim family's money would erase every debt they owed, that Amara should smile and be grateful. But Amara wasn't thinking about gratitude. She was thinking about the folder she had found 3 nights earlier, hidden inside her fiancé's desk drawer, filled with medical records stamped in red ink. Infertile, confirmed, permanent. And beneath that folder, a second one, older, yellowed at the edges, with her own father's signature on a debt agreement that made her stomach turn. This wasn't a marriage, it was a transaction, and she was the collateral. If this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe, tap that like button, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from tonight. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Kim Jun-ho was not a man who smiled at weddings. He stood at the altar in a black suit that fit him like armor, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. The kind of stillness that made grown men in his organization lower their voices when he walked past. He hadn't wanted this marriage either. His grandmother, dying and desperate for an heir before she closed her eyes for the last time, had arranged it without asking him. A foreign bride, chosen for her family's silence and her father's debts, someone who could never expose the truth about him. Because Jun-ho knew what the doctor's report said, he had read them 100 times in the dark, alone, hating every word. An heir was impossible. And yet his grandmother believed a miracle could still happen, that love, or fate, or something older than medicine, might rewrite what science had already decided. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows neither of them meant, and applause that sounded to Amara like the closing of a cage door. That night, in a mansion colder than any house she had ever lived in, Jun-ho didn't touch her. He simply said, "We don't have to pretend to be something we're not. Stay out of my business, and I'll stay out of your life." Amara nodded, relieved and insulted in equal measure. She told herself it was enough. Safety for her family, a roof, a title. She didn't know yet that safety in this house was the most dangerous illusion of all. Weeks passed in careful silence. Amara learned the rhythms of the estate, which guards watched the gates at midnight, which rooms Jun-ho never entered, which servants flinched when his name was spoken too loudly. She noticed things she wasn't supposed to notice. A locked wing on the east side of the house. Whispered phone calls that stopped the moment she entered a room. A woman's photograph, half burned, tucked behind a painting in the study. Every question she asked was met with silence sharper than any answer. And still, despite herself, despite every warning her mother had given her about men like this, Amara began to notice the way Jun-ho's hands tightened when he thought no one was watching. The way grief sat behind his eyes like something he refused to name. One evening, she found him standing in the rain on the balcony, soaked through, staring at nothing. "You'll get sick," she said, stepping out beside him without thinking. He didn't move. "Some things," he said quietly, "you can't out cold with warmth." It wasn't an answer, but it was the first true thing he had ever said to her, and something in Amara's chest cracked open despite every wall she'd built. Then came the morning everything changed. Amara woke gripping the sink, her stomach turning violently, sweat beating at her temples. She told herself it was stress, bad food, the unbearable weight of pretending. But the sickness didn't pass. It came again the next morning, and the one after that, until she could no longer lie to herself about what her body was trying to tell her. She sat on the bathroom floor with a small plastic test in her trembling hands, staring at 2 lines that shouldn't have been possible. 2 lines that contradicted a stack of medical files locked in a drawer down the hall. 2 lines that meant either the doctors were wrong or something far darker was true. If this story is touching something in you right now, drop a comment and let us know. And smash that like button if you're feeling this as deeply as we are, because it's about to get a lot heavier. Amara didn't tell Jun-ho right away. She couldn't, because the moment she considered the pregnancy, another memory surfaced. A conversation she had overheard weeks earlier, through a cracked door, Jun-ho's uncle speaking in a low, venomous tone. If the wife proves useful before we deal with her, fine. If not, she disappears like the last one. She had told herself she misheard. She had told herself the last one meant nothing. But now, staring at the test in her hands, the words returned with a chill that settled deep in her bones. The last one. Had there been another bride before her? Someone erased so completely that even the servants never spoke her name? That night, she searched the locked east wing while Jun-ho was away, at a meeting that had emptied half the house of its guards. Her hands shook as she picked the old lock with a hairpin, a skill she'd learned from a hard childhood she rarely spoke about. Inside, dust covered a nursery that had never been used. A crib, a rocking chair, tiny clothes still folded in a drawer, and on the wall a photograph of a young woman who looked impossibly achingly like Amara herself. Beneath the photograph, a name was carved into the wood. Sumin, beloved wife, gone too soon. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Jun-ho had been married before, and whoever Sumin was, she had once stood in this same house, carrying the same secret Amara now carried inside her. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she spun around, heart slamming against her ribs, expecting a guard, expecting worse. Instead, it was Jun-ho, standing in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes moving from Amara's face to the nursery behind her, to the photograph on the wall. For a long, unbearable moment, neither of them spoke. "You shouldn't be in here," he finally said, his voice low, dangerous, and broken all at once. "Who was she?" Amara whispered. "Jun-ho. Who was Sumin?" He crossed the room slowly, his hand brushing the edge of the crib with a tenderness that startled her. "My wife," he said, "before you. She died 2 years ago. They told everyone it was an accident." He paused, jaw tightening. "It wasn't." Amara's pulse pounded in her ears. "Then what was it?" Jun-ho turned to face her fully now, and for the first time, she saw something raw behind his composure. Not the Mafia boss the world feared, but a man carrying a grief he had never allowed himself to grieve. "She was pregnant," he said, "just like the doctor said was impossible for me. And 3 days after she told my family, she was gone. They called it a car accident. I've spent 2 years trying to prove it wasn't." The room seemed to tilt beneath Amara's feet. She understood now. The infertility diagnosis wasn't just medical history. It was a weapon someone in this family had used before. A lie maintained to protect a secret far more dangerous than barren bloodlines. And now that same impossible sickness was growing inside her. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words leaving her before she could stop them. Jun-ho went utterly still, the color draining from his face as history folded violently in on itself. If your heart is racing right now, you are not alone. Like this video if this story has you on the edge of your seat, because the truth is about to get far more dangerous than either of them realized. The days that followed unraveled like thread pulled from a wound that never healed. Jun-ho placed guards Amara had never seen before around her every movement, refusing to explain, refusing to let her out of his sight. She resented the control until the night she overheard his uncle again, this time arguing openly, voice cracking with fury. "2 wives, 2 miracles. Do you understand what that looks like to the elders? They'll ask questions. They'll dig. And if they find out what we did to Sumin—" The sentence never finished. A door slammed. Amara stood frozen in the hallway, ice flooding her veins. We, not what happened to Sumin, what we did. She confronted Jun-ho that night, refusing to let fear silence her the way it clearly had silenced everyone else in this house. "Your uncle killed her," she said. "Didn't he? Because a pregnancy would have exposed a lie your family built everything on." Jun-ho's silence was answer enough, but what he said next shattered every assumption Amara had built. "It's not just infertility they lied about," he whispered, eyes hollow. "It's me. I'm not blood. I was adopted into this family as an infant, raised to inherit an empire I was never meant to threaten, until Sumin's child would have proven a bloodline claim strong enough to challenge my uncle's own son for control of everything. That's why she died, and that's exactly why you're in danger right now." Amara's world tilted violently on its axis. This had never been about her body or fertility or fate. It was about power, inheritance, and a secret buried so deep that 2 women, 2 pregnancies, 2 impossible miracles had become collateral damage in a war she never knew she'd married into. "We have to leave," Jun-ho said, gripping her hands with a desperation she had never seen in him. "Tonight, before they realize what you know." But as they moved toward the hidden passage behind the study, headlights swept across the driveway below, and Jun-ho's uncle stepped out of the car with 4 armed men behind him, his expression calm in a way that chilled Amara far more than rage ever could have. "Going somewhere?" he asked softly, looking directly at Amara's stomach. Subscribe now if you love suspense-filled stories with twists you never see coming, because what happens next will change everything you thought you understood about this family. The confrontation that followed happened fast and brutal. Jun-ho stepping in front of Amara without hesitation, voice steady despite the guns raised around them, revealing in front of the assembled men that he had already sent proof of Sumin's murder to a journalist outside the family's reach. Insurance he'd built quietly for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to use it. His uncle's calm cracked for the first time, fury replacing composure as he realized the nephew he'd underestimated had been 3 steps ahead all along. It wasn't Jun-ho's warning that saved them that night, though. It was Amara, refusing to stay silent one more time in her life, stepping forward despite her fear and speaking directly to the men holding weapons, reminding them she was the wife of their leader, carrying a child the entire family now knew was real, and that harming her meant answering not just to Jun-ho, but to every ally he'd quietly built preparing for exactly this moment. Doubt spread through the guards' expressions like fire through dry grass, and one by one, their weapons lowered. His uncle wasn't arrested that night, but he lost something far more valuable than freedom: the loyalty of men who no longer trusted a leader capable of murdering a pregnant woman to protect a lie. Within weeks, the empire shifted beneath him, and Jun-ho, quietly, without ever raising his voice, took back what had always been his to protect. Amara gave birth 7 months later to a healthy daughter, in a hospital room guarded not by fear but by choice, men and women who had chosen loyalty freely, for the first time in years. Jun-ho held his daughter with hands that had once only known violence, weeping in a way he had never allowed himself to weep for Sumin. Grief and joy tangled together in a moment neither of them tried to separate. Amara often thought back to that night in front of the mirror. The wedding dress that felt like a burial gown. The girl who believed she was walking into her own ending. She hadn't been. She had been walking into a beginning disguised as a punishment, a truth hidden inside a lie built to protect the wrong people for far too long. Before you go, subscribe. Share the story with someone who needs a reminder that truth always finds its way to the surface. And tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking from Amara in Jun-ho's story tonight. Because sometimes the marriage meant to break you is the very thing that finally sets you free.